พวกคุณล่ะ
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
We are talking Haunted Universities, the second semester. This is a 2022 movie from Thailand, and you can probably gather by the title that there is actually a sequel to a 2009 movie simply called Haunted Universities. Now, you can watch this movie without having seen the first one. It being an anthology movie doesn't really follow on at all from any of the stories. I haven't seen the original movie. And even within this film itself, this second semester film, none of the stories are kind of interlinked outside of they are all taking place within the kind of the walls of a university or a college. So I'm not going to pronounce the names of the directors because it's multiple directors, multiple casts, obviously, because they're all kind of Thai actors, and I'm not going to and actors and crew and everything. So I'll just butcher the names. So we'll just skip that bit. So yeah, 3 stories that make up this 2022 Haunted Universities second semester. Let's discuss. So the first movie. So this one is about this kind of class that are kind of, I guess, like the first year of a university class, and it focuses on 2 girls who are friends. One of which is kind of a little bit on the odd side. And she's kind of shunned by kind of the other classmates and stuff. And they're in this kind of opening kind of ceremony, and this kind of duo, one of which is kind of clearly going to becoming one of the more popular kids. Their relationship seems a little strained, and it appears the quieter one, the kind of the more introverted one, has the ability to actually see ghosts, and the other one knows about it, but she kind of doesn't want to kind of let her secret go. Inevitably, this kind of introverted, sort of quiet girl sees a whole bunch of ghosts within this kind of, this university kind of opening ceremony, and she's freaked out by it. And obviously, the kind of the faculty and the other students kind of just think she's crazy and humiliate her, really. And then it's kind of like it puts a strain on these 2 friends' relationship. So what will happen with that one? Well, you have to watch it. That's true of all of these 3 films. Let's talk about this first movie. Now, I have to be honest with you. I feel some things here may be lost in translation. I didn't really necessarily understand the context of this movie or the second one, or the kind of the second portion, the story 2. I feel some things here just didn't really make sense to me. I mean, the visuals are quite good, and all 3 of these movies, they kind of, I think they're shot on location. The atmosphere is pretty good, and they all 3 of them build up a good atmosphere. That is true. The photography, all that stuff is good. And there are some decent in this particular movie. I think visually speaking, this is probably the most creepy. It has the most kind of creepy visuals to a degree, but there is a little bit of kind of like clear CGI involved with this one, less so than the other 2. What I didn't really understand with this particular film though was, who are all these ghosts? I mean, there's like dozens of ghosts, but we're given no context about why is there ghosts here. I mean, you might say, oh yeah, there's 1 or 2 ghosts, in a school and things like that. But there seems to be, she sees them everywhere. And I'm like, well, is there some sort of backstory that we're supposed to know about? But, it doesn't really give you any kind of context. Nor does it give you any context about how or why she's kind of seeing ghosts, how long she's been seeing it, or kind of like, because yeah, it would freak you out, but if she's been seeing it her whole life, you would have thought she'd have some type of getting used to it by now, but it doesn't seem to be the case. So I got to be honest with you, this one I found it a little bit kind of hard to follow about what's actually kind of going on, and some of these ghosts seem to be passive, and some of them seem to be kind of like reaching out for her and stuff, thinking, so what do these ghosts want? What's the actual deal with them? So I didn't really get it. I mean, the story is mainly about these kind of 2 friends and how one doesn't really support the other one, for example. So it's not the point of the movie in this one. but I found the kind of the lore around this a little kind of confusing about what's actually kind of like meant to be happening in regards to why things are there a certain way. So I have to be honest, when I was watching this first segment, I was kind of thinking, yeah, it looks kind of cool. There are some cool visuals here, but it doesn't really make any sense to me. I'm not really, so I can't buy into the story because to me it just seems like really arbitrary. It just seems to be like, just, oh yeah, that'll be a cool visual. But I'm thinking, well, what's the story behind that? Why is this thing happening? So I've got to say, it was visually interesting, but it didn't grip me as a story. And I also found the end of it a little predictable, to be honest. So yeah, it was visually okay, but nothing particularly kind of memorable. The second story, I think, again, suffers from a little bit of the same issue here. And this tells the story of this particular kind of student who is very, very committed to his studies. I think a lot of people go off for some type of break, but he stays at university to do some extra kind of studying. And we learn that he actually suffers from seizures, epilepsy. And he's kind of got this kind of like girlfriend that, you know, he's kind of like, wants to kind of help him and everything, but he's kind of keeping the seizures a secret. And then we learn that there is this kind of legend and this particular kind of ghost story where someone sort of decades ago got killed in a car crash and wants to return to their bed on certain anniversaries. Okay, you know, spooky. And then of course this young lad, being the only one at this kind of campus, obviously starts to seeing things. But again, I didn't really understand why this ghost was so aggressive. I mean, if you're dying in a car crash, I mean, obviously with spirit kind of mythology, generally speaking, it's kind of like, you know, unfinished business and that kind of thing. But I didn't really understand why this ghost was attacking this kid, considering it died in a car crash. Well, you know, the person who died in a car crash, but seems to be wanting to strangle him. So I didn't really get it. Again, it just, I mean, who knows? Ghost logic. But again, I just think it needed some context in it. It just seemed to be, let's have a ghost. The reason seems somewhat arbitrary. The reason why they have it is so he can have all these kind of broken bones and he's all kind of like, you know, almost like cracking and sort of like doing unnatural movements and things. That's why they've chosen a car crash. But I didn't really think it would seem like that. And then it kind of ends up being more like a zombie, this one particularly. And this one uses more practical effects. But I've got to say, I don't know, it didn't really work for me, the actual visuals on this one. It looked a bit goofy, to be honest, the visuals. I mean, the actual, again, the location shooting, the cinematography, out of all of them, I think this is probably uses the location the best, certainly. And I kind of quite like the acting in this one. The guy did a reasonable job, even though it's sometimes difficult to kind of judge, you know, non-English speaking acting because you don't quite know if the translation you're reading is accurate. But I thought he did a good job. It's just that, I don't know, again, the ghost story didn't really make a lot of sense to me. The motivations of this kind of spirit, I didn't really understand. But, you know, again, it just kind of, whatever, you know, it just didn't really hold my interest, to be honest. And, you know, I actually watched these 3 segments with some distance between it. Oh man, it's just, it didn't really hold my interest. Now the third segment, this is the one I think that stands out by far and away as the most interesting, because it actually does something a little different, and it plays like a kind of horror comedy. In actual fact, it has quite broad comedy moments. But the interesting thing with this one is the setup and the visuals are all played straight. So what we have is this kind of 3 female kind of students working in this kind of newer building who are doing some sort of medical stuff. And one of the students had this kind of like brother who's like a sort of college dropout, and he's like a sort of a goofball really. And he's meant to meet his sister, but he goes to the wrong building, which is like an old condemned part of this kind of university. And there are a number of ghosts within this kind of building. and this guy doesn't realise they're ghosts for quite a good portion of this movie. For example, there's 3 ghosts. One of which is like an older sort of woman, like an ex-faculty member, and he just sees her as a kind of like an old woman. And then amusingly, there's this kind of like typical long-haired kind of Asian, you know, one who's sort of again, you know, walking on the kind of like cracked bones, and he thinks she's a goth. So he doesn't he just interacts with them like they're kind of just normal kind of folk, really. And there's like another one as well. So it's kind of funny, and there's some quite interesting kind of visual cues. So this one to me was the more memorable, because it does something a little different. But like I said, the actual ghosts and stuff are not really played for laughs. They're kind of acting like they would do in a straight kind of horror movie. But just we have these kind of goofy characters, and there's some kind of like sort of little moments where we have like, you know, funny music playing, and the kind of the camera freezes and does a few things to kind of like make the you know, the film seem more comedic. So it's a funny mix between comedy and horror. One that I have to be honest with you, I haven't kind of seen mixed like this before. Like I said, there are elements here that it plays straight, but it's also some like very kind of slapsticky comedy as well. But it's a strange mix, because it's like the ghosts aren't goofy, you know, the threat is real, but it's just like these these kind of characters are kind of like also somewhat kind of reacting kind of seriously, but also especially the guy acting goofy at the same time. So, you know, it was kind of memorable in a way, but it's kind of like a one-trick pony. So, you know, I thought the joke was funny and amusing, and it certainly you know, suits a short film rather than a feature-length film. But it's kind of, they don't really do much else with it. You know, we have this joke where we have these kind of people interacting with these kind of ghosts in a not typical way, but then it kind of does it again. So yeah, I like this one the best. I think that one is actually worth watching, especially if you're a fan of horror comedies, because it mixes these two genres in a way that I've not really seen before. And I like still the visuals. The visuals, as I said, they're just like any other horror film. But yeah, so that was a better section of the movie. That one actually had my interest, whilst the other two, I've got to say, didn't. So overall, I think this movie is not really a must-watch. It's maybe a 5 out of 10 for me, because I do think the visuals are interesting, if not always successful, but the first two, I have to be honest, are maybe not bad, but they're a bit of a slog, and even the third one has its problems. But you know, it's definitely worth seeing the third segment. I think, if you like a different take on something like this. But the first two for me were a bit of a miss, although I can appreciate there are some elements that were done well. So overall, it's a 5 out of 10. It's more or less an average film, pretty generic for the most part. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.